All right, so some crimes, they just, they really stick with you. And I think the Menendez case is definitely one of those. It's August 20, 1989 in Beverly Hills. You have this, this picture of wealth, this picture of perfection, and then suddenly it's shattered by shotgun blasts. Jose and Kitty Menendez found dead in their mansion,
Mhm.
and the accused, their sons, Lyle and Eric.
Yeah, it's a case that just, it captures the imagination, right? And I think at the heart of it is this really disturbing question. Were these young men driven by greed, or were they actually victims of horrific abuse? The kind of abuse that, well, that could push someone to do the unthinkable. And you've pulled together some really in-depth sources on this, haven't you? So let's dive into it.
The crime scene itself was just, well, brutal. Jose, who was a successful entertainment executive, was shot in the back of the head. But Kitty, she was shot multiple times, even in the kneecaps.
Right. It initially looked like, maybe a gang hit gone wrong, almost staged, but not very convincingly. And what was really strange right from the start was how Lyle and Eric reacted.
Yeah, their 911 call, they were clearly distressed, but there was this, I don't know, lack of urgency.
Yeah.
And they didn't really ask about, who could have done it or anything like that.
Exactly. And then in the months that followed, their behavior just became, well, bizarre. They went on this massive spending spree, over $700,000 in 6 months, Rolex watches, a Porsche, these extravagant trips. It definitely fueled that early suspicion that this was all about the inheritance.
Oh, absolutely. It just looks so bad. These young men living the high life while their parents were, barely buried. It's not surprising the investigators were suspicious. But the investigation really took a turn in March 1990, about 7 months after the murders. And it was a tip from Eric's therapist, someone he had actually confessed to.
Yeah, and that's what led to their arrest. And those images of these privileged young men in orange jumpsuits heading to court, well, they were really powerful.
Powerful, and I think for a lot of people, really confusing. Because up until that point, the public perception was, well, spoiled rich kids who snapped. But then, during the 1993 trial, the defense did something completely unexpected.
They dropped a bombshell. They claimed that Lyle and Eric had been subjected to years of horrific abuse by their father.
And Eric's testimony was particularly disturbing.
He alleged that the abuse began when he was just 6 years old. He said that his father molested him and that it eventually escalated to rape.
And Lyle, he claimed that he was also abused, although his abuse stopped when he was 8. And they both said that just days before the murders, they had this confrontation with their father, where he threatened to kill them if they ever told anyone. So they argued that they acted out of fear for their lives that night.
The defense tried to support these claims with testimony from other people as well, cousins, friends, even a teacher who said he remembered seeing signs of distress in the brothers, trying to build this picture of a very troubled family dynamic.
But the prosecution, they had a very different narrative.
Right. They basically said, look, these are spoiled, entitled kids who just wanted their parents' money. They kept pointing back to that spending spree, and they highlighted the fact that there wasn't any real physical evidence to support these claims of abuse going back decades. And of course, they emphasized that the brothers bought those shotguns using a fake ID just days before the murders. It suggested, premeditation. It cast doubt on this idea that it was self-defense.
And that first trial in 1993, it actually ended with a mistrial. The juries for each brother couldn't agree on a verdict. They were deadlocked. And, I think that really reflects just how divided public opinion was and still is about this case.
Yeah, even early on, it was just so hard for people to reconcile, the brutality of the crime with these shocking allegations. And then the retrial in 1995, while that was a major blow to the defense, the judge ruled that a lot of the evidence related to the abuse, he deemed it irrelevant.
Irrelevant. So basically, they couldn't really use it.
Yeah, and in a legal sense, irrelevant often means the evidence doesn't directly prove or disprove those specific charges, which in this case was first-degree murder. So it limited their ability to present their whole story, their alleged motive. But even with that restriction, both Eric and Lyle, they testified again.
Eric's testimony, it was incredibly emotional. He talked about years of alleged rape, the fear he lived with every day. And Lyle, He described his father's control over their lives and their mother Kitty's role in enabling that control. It was very
Yeah.
compelling stuff.
But the prosecution, they didn't waver. They maintained that these abuse claims were completely fabricated, a desperate attempt to escape responsibility. And they kept reminding the jury of the brothers' initial lies to the police, how they staged the crime scene, the kneecap shots, collecting those shell casings, getting rid of their bloody clothes. This evidence of planning, it was really key to their argument for first-degree murder.
And in 1996, the second jury came back with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder for both Lyle and Eric. They were sentenced to life in prison without parole. And that was it.
So the legal battle was over, but, those questions about the alleged abuse, they never really went away. They became, in a way, even more powerful because now you have these two young men serving life sentences, and many people wondered if justice had truly been served.
Right. And their lives in prison, well, that was a whole other chapter. They were actually separated for a long time, which was really hard on them. Eric, he's spoken about how vulnerable he felt, how he's bullied. Lyle, as the older brother, tried to protect him, but it was difficult. They were in this incredibly harsh environment, having to deal the weight of their crime, and for them, the trauma that they said led to it. It's hard to imagine what that must have been like.
But something interesting happened over the years. They both started to get involved in prison programs. They took classes, got college degrees, worked with other inmates. It seemed like they were genuinely trying to make something of their lives despite the situation. Lyle, he even joined a hospice group, and Eric, he found some solace in music. So it raises this question, even after committing such a horrific crime, is redemption possible?
And then, in 2018, they were finally reunited in the same prison. It was apparently a very emotional reunion. And it happened around the same time as the hashtag #MeToo movement, which, really changed the conversation about sexual abuse, especially for men. And then in 2024, the Netflix series, Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, that brought the case back into the public eye in a big way. People started re-examining the evidence, the trial, and asking if maybe in today's world things would have been different.
Absolutely, and that's where the new legal developments come in. In 2023, their lawyers filed a habeas corpus petition, which is basically a way of challenging the legality of their imprisonment.
And they did this based on new evidence.
Yes. Evidence they believe supports their claims of abuse. One piece is a letter Eric wrote to his cousin Andy Canoe back in 1988, just a few months before the murders. And in that letter, Eric says, and I quote, "I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now, I'm afraid." Now this is pretty significant. Because it's a contemporaneous account written before the murders, that seems to back up their claims of long-term abuse. It wasn't just something they said years later at trial.
And on top of that, Roy Rossello, who was a member of the band Menudo, he came forward and accused Jose Menendez of raping him in the 1980s. So suddenly you have this other person alleging abuse by Jose.
Right.
It definitely lends some credibility to the brothers' story.
It does. And in October 2024, then LA District Attorney George Gascon, he actually recommended that Lyle and Eric be resentenced to 50 years to life, which would have made them eligible for parole. And even Kitty Menendez's sister, she supported their release.
Wow, so there was real momentum there.
There was. But then things took another turn. Nathan Hawkman, he was elected the new DA in December 2024, and by March 2025, he made it very clear that he opposed a new trial. He basically dismissed this new evidence as not credible and called the self-defense claim a fabrication. He even withdrew Gascon's resentencing motion, saying that Lyle and Eric hadn't taken full responsibility for their crimes.
So a major setback.
A huge setback. Especially for their family, who, they were really hoping for their release. And right now, as we're reporting this, it's late March 2025, and the legal process is still playing out. They have a resentencing hearing scheduled for April 17th and 18th, and Governor Newsom has ordered a parole board review for June. So Lyle and Eric, they're in limbo, waiting to see what's going to happen.
It's just incredible the twists and turns this case has taken over the years. And it really brings us back to that core question. Were Lyle and Eric Menendez victims, or were they villains? It's a debate that has raged for decades.
And there are compelling arguments on both sides. With the letter and Rosella's allegations, it seems more likely that they were abused. And we know that trauma can have a profound impact on people's actions. It's not hard to imagine how years of abuse, especially at such a young age, could lead someone to violence. And hashtag #MeToo movement, it's definitely made people more aware of these issues, including male victims of abuse. So you have to wonder, if the trial happened today, would the outcome be different?
Maybe. But on the other hand, the premeditation, The brutality of the murders, especially those kneecap shots, the lies they told initially, that's hard to ignore. And the fact that they staged the crime scene, I mean, that suggests a level of calculation that's difficult to square with a purely self-defense argument. And as D.A. Helkman has said, they haven't really taken full responsibility for what they did.
And that's a point that resonates with a lot of people. Even if they were abused, they still killed their parents in a very brutal way. And how do you balance that? How do you weigh the trauma they might have suffered against the taking of two lives? It's such a morally complex case, and there are no easy answers.
No, there aren't. And I think that's why it's so fascinating and so disturbing. We have this horrific crime, these shocking allegations, these legal battles that have gone on for decades. It really forces you to grapple with so many difficult questions about abuse, about justice, about the very nature of right and wrong.
And so much of this case is about perception. How we perceive the Menendez brothers, how we perceive the evidence, how we perceive the very idea of justice itself. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to try and understand the complexities of human behavior, the long-term impact of trauma, and the limits of our legal system.
And that's exactly what we've tried to do in this deep dive, to lay out all the facts, all the perspectives, and really examine this case from every angle. And we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? Do you think Lyle and Eric Menendez were victims driven to a desperate act? Or were they cold-blooded killers who deserve to spend the rest of their lives behind bars? It's a conversation that needs to continue, and we encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments.
And if you found this deep dive into the Menendez brothers' story as fascinating and as troubling as we did, please hit that subscribe button and give us a like. Your support helps us keep bringing you these complex, thought-provoking stories.
Thanks for listening.